Okay, I'm going to demonstrate on how to change out a toilet. Now this is both for changing out from an old one to new one, or if you have some type of issue, you have to take the toilet up and then reset it again. So I've already jumped the gun a little bit of taking the old toilet up, which, you know, it's not an old toilet. I'm going to put it back. But it's fairly easy. The supply line you can disconnect from either end. Obviously you turn off the water from the shut off here. Once the water is shut off, usually that's pretty hand tight on the bottom of your toilet right there. So this is a female and that's the male end, and you just unscrew it. If it's really tight, you can put some channel locks on it to get it off, or you can go from the bottom, take it off from the bottom. Doesn't really matter. In this case, I usually prefer to take it off from the top, but again, it's irrelevant how you take it up. Once you've done that, then there are these bolts that hold the floor bolts that hold the toilet to the ground. There's two of them, and they go on the toilet flange, which once I take all this wax up, you'll see how those set in. There are washers, and the washers sit on these caps, these cap bases. The cap base itself goes on first, which would be right here, and then the washer sits on top, and then the nut goes on to that bolt over there. So it's just the reverse process that I'm going to show when I put it back. Once you've taken both of those nuts and those washers off, then the toilet is basically free to come off of the floor. And of course the supply line too. Those are the only three things that hold or that have to do with the toilet being literally hooked up. So the supply line and the two bolts that get taken off. So what you'll end up seeing, there is excess water that's in this P-trap in every toilet. So when you take it up, of course you're going to need a towel to take up the excess water. I cleaned off a little bit of the grime that was already here. This wax ring is very old. Wax rings come in a box at Home Depot. I'm sure everybody's seen one before. That's just a plastic cover to keep it intact, and that's what a wax ring typically looks like. This is part of the flange of the wax ring that turns upside down that goes into the toilet. You can see the old one sitting right there. So this is the way that it sets. So I'm going to show that in a little bit. This wax ring is very old, and whether it's old or new, the process is the same. You get a little scraper like this, and then you just take up the wax. It usually comes up in pretty good chunks like that. Have something to throw away the wax with, which I'm just using the Home Depot bag. So as you can see, this is pretty much coming up in one fell swoop. So that's it. That's the old wax, and also that black flange that I just showed you a second ago. That's a lot of wax. I think this is a double wax ring. It looks like they had problems with the toilet leaking at one point, so they doubled up on the rings. And I did not get an extra thick ring. I have a standard size ring, so I think I'm going to have to go back to Home Depot and get a secondary ring. This is a very old toilet connection. You can tell this is lead pipe rather than PVC or ABS. And these are the bolts that it sets inside. The new toilet wax ring comes with a set of bolts, and it comes with the washers and the nuts as well. So I'm going to go ahead and try and use what was already there, because there's nothing wrong with those bolts. They're in pretty tight. And so I will be back as soon as I get an appropriate ring. Okay, so it appears that the customer had already bought a wax ring prior to me showing up. So rather than go to Home Depot and get the extra thick wax ring, which they do sell, I went ahead and took their thinner wax ring and I took it off of the ring, or the flange itself, and then I just kind of fashioned out a secondary, not a ring, but you know, a secondary seal at the bottom, and then I put the new wax ring right on top. So you'll see this black flange is already inset inside there. Then the next thing you do is straighten out the bolts so that they are facing up like that, so that when you lift the toilet up, which I cannot show this process because it takes two hands, you'll lift the toilet up and set it down to where the bolts line up with both the right and the left hole. And with any luck, you do it the first shot, and then you just set the toilet down firmly. So I'm going to go through that process right now, and I will be back. Okay, I've reset this toilet. As I showed, both of the bolts on the left and the right side are lined up straight, and then it takes two hands. I just grip down here at the center portion of the toilet, and I just kind of lower it down. Sometimes you can get lucky and actually set this front part down first on the floor, and then you can look on your left and your right to see if your bolts are lined up with your opposing holes. And in this case I was. It was a fairly easy process to do. So what I've already done is, because my bolts were already lined up and made it really easy to set the toilet down, then I just went ahead and put my the cap washer on first. These cap washers actually will have some writing on it that says this side up. So make sure that these cap washers are facing up and not down, otherwise your cap won't snap in there. The next thing is a little washer that goes on there that comes with your little package of bolts, right? So that's the washer. And then of course in the package is a nut. So the nut just gets tightened down. You can use an adjustable wrench, just tighten it down. As a rule, you're tightening it down to the point where the toilet doesn't move. So can you over tighten? Absolutely, especially if you're not using these caps. If all you're using is the metal washer and the nut, I've seen where people have tightened it down so much they've cracked the porcelain of the tile and of the toilet, and they've ruined the whole toilet just by virtue of tightening it down too much. So you kind of get a feel after a while on how much to tighten it down. These plastic washers here for the caps will start bending out and get contorted if you tighten it down too much. So as a rule, you only tighten it down enough to where you can't shake it. Like if you try and move it to the left or the right or anything like that, then it doesn't move, and then that's about the point you want to stop. So in essence, what you're doing is you're pulling the toilet down closer to the floor and therefore to the wax ring below it. The way I place a wax ring, by the way, if you're doing a new toilet, some say that you would turn the toilet on its side and you place a wax ring, the wax part of it, on the flange that's underneath the toilet. I never do that. I always place the wax ring on the floor, but I'm just letting you know that's another way to put the wax ring on. I just don't do it that way. And so then the next step would be, of course, these bolts that I showed you earlier. These are the toilet floor bolts, and if you see, these bolts are they're not round, right? So that has an opposing slot that's in the toilet flange that goes to the floor. So this part goes into the slot and then it slides to wherever you want it, and this little plastic piece on the bolt pushes down on top of the flange to hold the bolt still. That's the only reason you have that plastic there, is to hold the bolt still. So when you're trying to put the toilet on, you can align your bolts to the holes, and that's what the plastic piece is for. These bolts are generally about 2.5, almost 3 inches long, and so this one, because it's already been cut off before, it doesn't really matter. But if I had used this one here, you see, I would have had to cut off the excess, because there's probably about another 3/4 to an inch excess that I would have to cut off. Some people prefer a hacksaw to do that with, a metal cutting hacksaw blade to cut off that excess. I prefer the good old bolt cutters. I have a mini size bolt cutters, and it's really easy to get that in there and then just cut off your excess of your bolt. It works like a charm every time, and that's what I use. Other than that, as I said, you can use either adjustable wrench or little mini channel locks to tighten that down, which I've already done. Then you go ahead, put that aside, you go ahead and put your caps on. And snap right in there, like that. And that snaps right in there too. I've seen time and time and again where people well, you either use plumber's putty or caulking to put those caps in, and that's not really the way they go in. Those opposing cap washers that I showed you, for lack of a better term, that's the proper way to put them in. They snap in like that. So just in case you were wondering. I've also seen people caulk around the base of the toilet. One of the reasons they do that is because they have excess water seeping out, and they kind of feel like maybe if they caulk around it, that'll stop the water, and it really won't. It'll get the caulking nice and mold and mildewy, but that's about it. I don't like caulking around the base of the toilet because it hides what problems you might have. In addition to that, if you ever have to swap the toilet out or whatever, especially on a linoleum floor like this, you have to cut out all that caulking, and then you risk damaging your floor. So I just like to leave it alone the way it is like that. And so you've seen I've done the 2 bolts and the nuts and the caps. And then the last thing, of course, is to put the toilet supply line back, which literally you can do with your hand. These are plastic nuts on these supply lines. All of them have plastic nuts. So it's never a really good idea to over tighten, because you can crack these plastic nuts fairly easily. And as you saw, and you see now, hand tight is good. As soon as you get that good seal there, nothing's going to happen when you turn on the water. No leakage at all. So that's basically it. And then, of course, the next step is waiting for your water to fill up and test your flush. Now, having said that, sometimes it's wise to set the toilet on top of the wax ring, hook up your supply line, and don't do anything about anchoring your toilet. And then flush the toilet 2 or 3 times, make sure you have no leakage coming out of the bottom, that everything's good, before you actually go through all the trouble of tightening the nuts and all that stuff. Which I've already done in this case, so I already know that I have a good seal with my wax ring. And so for demo purposes, I'm just doing it a second time to show you the process. It's a really easy process to do. I think typically a plumber, depending on where you live and how busy he is, plumber's going to get somewhere between about $150 to $200 to do what I've just done. There's no point in paying, even if it's a $100 bill. It's so easy that it's almost goof proof. The only way you can mess this up is not get a good seal on your wax ring, and then you just reverse the whole process again, and try and get that seal again. And that's really all there is to setting a toilet. Again, it doesn't matter if it's a new one or an old one, the process is still the same. So once this toilet fills up, we'll go ahead and flush it, and you will see that there's no leak down here at the base. And these are extra bolts that came in the box with the wax ring, so I go ahead and keep those for some other job I might need them for in the future, since we already used the old bolts. And that's it. Not much else to show. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I hope that helps. I hope there's a full knowledge of how to change out a toilet now. If there's not, leave me your questions below and I will answer them. I don't think I really missed anything. I really should have showed you how to take the toilet out, but the reverse process of putting it back is the same, so it's easy to figure out. So there you go.